This is a presentation for Chapter 13, the endocrine system. So we start out with general characteristics of this particular system. Along with the nervous system, it regulates functions of the body to maintain homeostasis and coordinates communication. So in some ways, it is similar to the nervous system because of the communication part. However, it uses chemicals in the form of hormones as opposed to, say, electrochemicals like the nervous system uses. It's a unique system since the organs are not anatomically connected, like in most systems. The major endocrine glands include the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, the adrenal glands, the pancreas, the pineal gland, the thymus, and ovaries and testes, which are reproductive glands. And this shows where each of those organs are found. So here's the hypothalamus up in the internal brain. Pituitary gland is at the forefront of the brain stem. The pineal gland is at the back of basically the thalamus. And then you have the thyroid gland there in the neck. Moving down closer to the heart, we have the thymus. On top of the kidneys, you have the adrenal glands. Between the kidneys, you have the pancreas. And then, as we said, the reproductive glands, the ovary in the female and the testis in the male. Okay, endocrine glands are cells, tissues, organs that make up the endocrine system. It is ductless. Okay, so it secretes hormones directly into the body fluids, not through tubes. Endocrine means internal secretion. Hormones act only on the target cells that contain receptors for them. So this is why the hormones will not cause effects on certain parts or organs. Okay, exocrine glands. These are glands that secrete into ducts or tubes that lead to a body surface, and they secrete externally. They deliver their products directly to a specific site. Other cells secrete chemical messengers internally, and they're called local hormones, not actually hormones. There are paracrine secretions that affect nearby cells. There are autocrine secretions that affect only the cells that secrete them. And auto means self. Okay, comparing the nervous and endocrine systems. So both the nervous and endocrine systems function in communication. Both systems communicate via chemicals that bind to receptor molecules. The nervous system releases neurotransmitters into the synapses. So those are the chemicals there. Endocrine system secretes hormones into the bloodstream. The nervous system responds much faster, though, than the endocrine system. The endocrine system, though it may react slower, it lasts longer than the nervous system. Okay, and this shows some basic comparisons between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Okay, and this is figure 13.3 from your book, Chemical Communication in Nervous and Endocrine Systems. So again, it's showing you the particular cells that may be used and the types of chemicals that are being used for communication. Okay, table 13.2 gives you hormone names and abbreviations, and this would be a good chart to start to get to know. You do need to know the source and the effects of each of these types of hormones, and we will go through these. Okay, and this is more of those hormones listed here. Okay, so hormone action. So hormones are released into extracellular fluid, and then they diffuse into the blood. A method of transport through the blood depends on whether the hormone is lipid soluble or it's water soluble. It's very powerful substances in low concentrations, really, when we talk about hormones. Okay, let's talk about some of the chemistry related to hormones. Hormones are organic compounds. Remember, organic means contains carbon and hydrogens, really at the base level. There's two general types. You have steroid or steroid-like hormones. Steroids are lipids containing complex rings of carbon and hydrogen atoms. And all steroid hormones are produced from cholesterol, believe it or not. Some examples, sex hormones like testosterone and estrogens, and adrenal cortex hormones like cortisol and aldosterone. And then we have the non-steroid hormones like the amines, which are derived from tyrosine, so epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroxine. Then you have the proteins, which are composed of long chains of amino acids, like growth hormone. Then you have peptides. These are short chains of amino acids, like antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. And then you have glycoproteins, which are carbohydrates joined to proteins, like thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, and this chart separates those different types of compounds that we just talked about briefly and gives you some of the examples. And this shows you some of the structural formulas of those different types of hormones based on the type of chemistry they have. Let's talk about hormone action then. They exert their effects by altering metabolic processes. So they might alter the enzyme activity. Remember, enzymes are basically catalysts. They help enable reaction to occur. They speed it up. And they may change the rate of the membrane transport of a substance also. They deliver messages by binding to the receptors on or in the target cell. They can cause changes in target cells even in extremely low concentrations. The number of receptors determine the strength of the response, and they can be changed to alter the response. We can talk about upregulation and downregulation with these. In upregulation, we have an increase in the number of receptors on the target cells in response to a decrease in hormone levels. In downregulation, we have a decrease in the number of receptors on the target cell, and this is due to an increase in hormone levels. Okay, let's look at some specific ones. So the steroid and thyroid hormones. So they have poor water solubility. They're transported through the blood, bound to plasma proteins. The steroid hormones can diffuse through the lipid bilayer of the cell membranes. The thyroid hormones are thought to enter the cell by very specific transport methods, but both types bind to receptors inside the cell, usually in the nucleus. And because of that, it can cause transcription of specific types of genes in the DNA. Protein synthesis can lead to the action of the hormone. And this is a sequence of steroid hormone action. So the endocrine gland secretes steroid hormone. The blood carries the hormone molecule throughout the body, and this is usually weakly bound to transport proteins. The unbound steroid hormone diffuses through the target cell membranes and enters the cytoplasm or the nucleus. The hormone combines with the receptor molecule in the cytoplasm or nucleus. The steroid hormone receptor complex binds to the DNA in the nucleus and promotes transcription of messenger RNA. Then the messenger RNA enters the cytoplasm and directs protein synthesis. The newly synthesized proteins produce the steroid hormone's specific effects. Okay, in this case, we show a steroid hormone in play. So the lipid-soluble steroid hormone reaches a target cell and crosses the cell membrane. The hormone combines with the protein receptor, usually in the nucleus. The hormone receptor complex activates transcription to synthesize specific messenger RNA molecules, and the messenger RNA molecules leave the nucleus, enter the cytoplasm, and then translation of the messenger RNA molecules leads to the synthesis of encoded proteins that are associated with the hormone's actions. Now, non-steroid hormones cannot penetrate the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. They're bound to receptors on the target cell membranes. The hormone is considered a first messenger in this case. The chemical that induces changes leads to hormones effect, and that is considered the second messenger. Many hormones use cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or CAMP, as a second messenger. And the entire process of chemical communication from outside cells to inside is called signal transduction. Okay, so this is a sequence of actions of the non-steroid hormone, in this case using CAMP. So the endocrine gland secretes the non-steroid hormone. The blood carries the hormone molecules throughout the body. The hormone combines with the receptor sites on the membranes of its target cell, activating the G protein. Adenylate cyclase molecules are activated in the target cell's membrane. Adenylate cyclase converts the ATP into the cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP activates protein kinases. The protein kinases activate protein substrates in the cell that change in the metabolic processes, and the cellular changes produce the hormone's effects. And this shows the adenylate cyclase catalyzing conversion of the ATP into CAMP. Okay, this shows you the non-steroid hormone action. Again, so the non-steroid hormone reaches the target cell. The non-steroid hormones bind the receptor molecules on the cell membranes. The hormone binding activates G proteins that bind and activate molecules of adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase catalyzes conversion of ATP into cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or CAMP, and then the CAMP activates existing proteins, causing a series of reactions leading to the cellular changes associated with the hormone's action. Okay, some clinical applications. So abusing hormones to improve athletic performance. And I'm sure you've heard of this before. Sometimes athletes have made use of steroids, and this is used to increase muscular strength. It can have a lot of harmful effects, like decreasing natural testosterone production, stunting growth, breast development in males, male sexual characteristics in females, damage to the kidneys, liver, or heart, increase in the low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, and psychiatric problems. Okay, growth hormone. It can be used to enlarge muscles, and it's used instead of or along with steroids in this case. And then there's erythropoietin. It's used to increase the number of red blood cells and oxygen delivery to the muscles. It's used to treat certain forms of anemia, but using it to improve athletic performance is not advised because it can lead to heart attack and death. Okay, let's look at some specific categories. The prostaglandins. So these are paracrine substances. They're very potent in small amounts, like hormones. They're not stored in cells, but they're synthesized just before release. And they're rapidly inactivated after use. They regulate cellular responses to hormones. And they can activate or inhibit adenylate cyclase to control CAMP production and change in a cell's response to a hormone. They have a wide variety of effects, such as contracting or relaxing smooth muscle, stimulating or inhibiting secretion, regulating blood pressure, other effects of pressure, controlling movement of water and sodium in the kidneys, and promoting inflammation. Okay, so these are not actually hormones. These are chemicals that affect hormones. Okay, how do we control hormonal secretions? Well, secretion is precisely regulated, and it's primarily controlled by negative feedback mechanisms. The effects can be short-lived, a few minutes, or they could be last for days. And some are excreted in the urine after exerting their effects. They can be broken down by enzymes, mainly from the liver, to stop their effects. And remember from 168, negative feedback means it reduces the effect of something. One of the common examples we always use with negative feedback would have to do with maintaining your body temperature. So if you go too far away from body temperature, you'll bring it back. Positive feedback does the opposite, remember. Okay, so negative feedback is a control mechanism in which rising levels of a hormone leads to a decrease in hormone secretion. As a hormone is used up, inhibition stops and secretion begins again. It's the main methods of control of hormone secretion. There's three methods of negative feedback control of hormone secretion. The hypothalamus controls release of anterior pituitary hormones. Then pituitary hormones secrete hormones that control the activity of other glands. So tropic hormones, these are hormones that act on other glands. Another method of negative feedback, the nervous system control. The nervous system directly stimulates some glands to secrete their hormones through nerve impulses. And then we have changes in the composition of the internal environment. Changing levels of a specific substance in the blood, like an ion or glucose, stimulates or inhibits secretion of certain hormones. Okay, and you can certainly have positive feedback. Control mechanisms in which rising levels of a hormone and leads to an increase in secretion. This is used in a small number of cases of hormone control, mainly in the reproductive system. Okay, and this shows those three areas of control, using the hypothalamus, the nervous system, and changing levels of substance in the plasma. Okay, notice there are different levels of negative feedback in all of these cases. Okay, so as you can see in this picture, here's an example. So we have the normal hormone levels. Now, if it gets too high, we have a stimulus. Okay, and the receptors are sensitive to this change. It senses the change. Then the control center of the endocrine gland will be inhibited. The effectors, in this case, the hormone secretion is decreased. The response, the hormone levels will return towards normal. What about the opposite? If the hormone levels are too low, well, there's the stimulus. It picks up on that. The receptors realize that it's changed. The control center, the endocrine gland is stimulated. The effectors, the hormone secretion is increased. In response, hormone levels are returned towards normal. Okay, negative feedback control typically involves slight fluctuations, really, in hormone concentrations. And it's kind of constantly up and down around an average concentration. You don't want these to swing much more than this. Okay, let's talk about the pituitary gland. It lies at the base of the brain in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. It's controlled by the brain and it's considered part of the nervous system. It's attached to the hypothalamus by a pituitary stalk, also called the infundibulum. It consists of two distinct portions, an anterior lobe, also called the adenohypophysis, and the posterior lobe, or the neurohypophysis. Secretion from two lobes is controlled by different methods by the hypothalamus. Small intermediate lobes, or the pars intermedia, develops in the fetus. It produces a melanocyte-stimulating hormone, which starts melanin production. Okay, and this shows you where the pituitary gland is found. Okay, hypothalamic control of the pituitary gland. Well, as we said, you have anterior lobe regulation and posterior lobe. For anterior lobe regulation, the hypothalamic releasing hormones or release inhibiting hormones are transported to the anterior lobe through the hypophyseal portal veins. This is an example of a portal system. This stimulates the cells of the anterior lobe to release hormones. Each releasing hormone acts on a specific group of cells in the anterior pituitary and can stimulate or inhibit pituitary secretions. In posterior lobe regulation, nerve impulses from the hypothalamus travel to the posterior lobe through the infundibulum. This stimulates the nerve endings in the posterior lobe to release hormones. Okay, and this shows you both controls. There's the anterior, there's the posterior lobe. And you know, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland is extremely small, and yet the front of it and the back are quite separate and do drastically different things. Now, hypothalamic control of the peripheral endocrine glands. The hypothalamus, which is an endocrine gland, controls hormones secretion from peripheral endocrine glands via three-step pathways. Releasing or release inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus acts on specific hormone secreting cells in the anterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary hormones act on cells in a peripheral endocrine gland to stimulate the secretions. Peripheral endocrine gland secretes its hormones, which exerts effects on the target cells. Usually there are multiple negative feedback controls involved in these pathways. The final hormone in the pathway inhibits secretion of both the releasing hormone and the anterior pituitary hormone. The anterior pituitary hormone inhibits secretion of releasing hormone. Okay, and this figure shows hypothalamic control of the peripheral endocrine glands. Okay, the green is stimulation, red is inhibition. Okay, the anterior pituitary hormone specifically. The anterior lobe of the pituitary gland consists of glandular epithelial tissue. The anterior pituitary hormones are produced in the anterior lobe by one of 5 types of secretory cells. Each anterior lobe hormone is released in response to a releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Some are inhibited by release-inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus. The major anterior pituitary hormones include growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid-stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. Okay, releasing hormones of the hypothalamus. Secretion of each anterior pituitary hormone is regulated by a releasing hormone, a release-inhibiting hormone, or both from the hypothalamus. Growth hormone. It's released by growth hormone releasing hormone. It's inhibited by growth hormone inhibiting hormone, also called somatostatin. Prolactin. It's inhibited by prolactin inhibiting hormone, and it's perhaps released by prolactin releasing factor. Thyroid stimulating hormone, also called thyrotropin. It's released by thyrotropin releasing hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, or it's easier to say ACTH, or corticotropin, is released by corticotropin releasing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are both released by gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay, figure 13.15 shows hormones of the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, and then the target organs that are related to it. So you might want to take a few seconds and take a look at that figure. As you can see, ultimately they are affecting other endocrine organs. Okay, but they are starting at the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. Functions of the anterior pituitary hormones. So growth hormone, or somatotropin, stimulates cells to enlarge and divide rapidly. It increases amino acid uptake and protein synthesis. It decreases the rate of carbohydrate usage, and it increases the rate of fat usage. Prolactin promotes milk production in females. Uncertain functions, though, in males, because it is in males. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates secretion of thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, from the thyroid gland. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, stimulates secretion of cortisol and other glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. Follicle stimulating hormone causes growth and development of ovarian follicles in females and sperm production in males. And luteinizing hormone causes ovulation in females, sex hormone production in both genders. Pathways for thyroid hormone secretion. The pathway for thyroid hormone secretion, in this case, we start with TRH, thyroid releasing hormone. It's secreted by the hypothalamus, and it causes the anterior pituitary to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. Then TSH travels to the thyroid gland, causes it to secrete thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones exert their effects on target cells, and the thyroid hormones also exert negative feedback on secretion of thyroid releasing hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone secretion is controlled by 2 methods in this pathway. The TSH secretion is controlled to some extent by the level of TRH. And TSH secretion is also controlled by negative feedback by thyroid hormones, the final hormones in the pathway. And this shows you that feedback. Okay, clinical applications. Growth hormone ups and downs. Well, there is some conditions that are caused by growth hormones either being too high or too low. And hypopituitary dwarfism. This is caused by deficiency of human growth hormone during childhood. These individuals have short stature, but their body proportions and mental development are normal. HGH treatment must start before bones completely ossify if there's anything to be done about this. Okay, gigantism is caused by oversecretion of GH during childhood. Height may exceed 8 feet in these individuals, and they may have other metabolic problems as well. It's often caused by a pituitary tumor. And acromegaly, this is caused by oversecretion of growth hormone during adulthood, after the epiphyseal plates ossify. There's no increase in height, but bones thicken, and you get enlargement of the tongue, nose, hands, feet, jaw, heart, and thyroid gland. Okay, here we show two individuals, one with gigantism and the other with pituitary dwarfism. All right, let's talk about the posterior pituitary hormones. The posterior lobe of the pituitary gland consists of nerve fibers from the hypothalamus and neuroglia, unlike glandular epithelium of the anterior lobe. Two hormones are produced in the hypothalamus, and they're stored and released by the posterior pituitary gland. These hormones are transported to the posterior pituitary gland via the pituitary stalk or infundibulum. The posterior pituitary hormones are antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. The structure of ADH and oxytocin are very similar, but they have very different functions. So, ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, also called vasopressin, decreases urine production by reducing volume of water the kidneys excrete. It can cause vasoconstriction to increase blood pressure. Oxytocin causes vasoconstriction to increase blood pressure. It causes muscle contraction in the uterine wall during childbirth. It causes milk ejection during lactation. It has no proven function in males, but it may help with sperm movement or sexual response. And this shows the structure of ADH and oxytocin. As you can see, there are some similarities there. Again, but very different effects. Okay, table 13.6 shows you the hormones of the pituitary gland, and this would be a good chart for you to get to know. You need to know the actions and the source of control and where they are produced. Let's look at the thyroid gland. It consists of two lateral lobes connected by an isthmus. It lies just below the larynx, anterior and lateral to the trachea. It has a special ability to remove iodine from the blood, and it produces three hormones: T4, or thyroxine, produced by follicular cells; T3, or triiodothyronine, which is produced by follicular cells; and then calcitonin, produced by extrafollicular cells. Thyroid is composed of round secretory units called follicles, and each follicle is surrounded by a single layer of follicular cells. A viscous colloid fills the follicle cavities, and extrafollicular cells lie outside of the follicles. Okay, and this shows the thyroid around the larynx. And this shows you the structure of the thyroid gland at the cellular level. Figure 13.21 and table 13.7 show you hormones of the thyroid gland, so the T4 and the T3. And the table also goes into the actions and the sources of control for these. Actually, let me go through those really quickly. So thyroxine, T4, it increases the rate of energy release from carbohydrates. It increases the rate of protein synthesis. It accelerates growth. It's necessary for normal nervous system maturation. Okay, T3, it's the same as T4, but much more potent. And then calcitonin lowers blood calcium and phosphate ion concentrations by inhibiting the release of calcium and phosphate ions from the bones, and by increasing excretion of calcium by the kidneys. Okay, some disorders of the thyroid gland. Thyroid disorders can result in underactivity, which we call hypothyroidism, or overactivity, or hyperthyroidism. These actually are quite common. In hypothyroidism, this causes low metabolic rates, resulting in cold sensitivity and weight gain. Congenital hypothyroidism in newborns can result from abnormal thyroid structure or insufficient thyroid hormone. It results in problems with bone formation, growth, and intellectual abilities. The adult hypothyroidism results in fatigue, low metabolic rate, and weight gain. Now, oppositely, hyperthyroidism, it causes high metabolic rate, restlessness, weight loss, and overeating. It's caused by a non-cancerous thyroid tumor or excess T4 medication, or can be an autoimmune disease. Okay, some particular disorders. Hyperthyroidism, high metabolic rate, sensitivity to heat, restlessness, hyperactivity, weight loss, protruding eyes, and goiter. In Graves' disease, we have autoantibodies which work against itself, and they bind TSH receptors on the thyroid cell membranes and mimics the action of thyroid stimulating hormone, which overstimulates the glands, leading to hyperthyroidism, exophthalmia, which is protrusion of the eyes, and goiter. Okay, in hypothyroid, in Hashimoto disease, we have autoantibodies that destroy the thyroid cells, which results in hyperthyroidism. Okay, in infantile hypothyroidism, we get stunted growth, abnormal bone formation, intellectual disability, and sluggishness. In adult hypothyroidism, we have low metabolic rate, sensitivity to cold, sluggishness, poor appetite, swollen tissue, and mental dullness. In simple goiter, we have a deficiency of thyroid hormones due to iodine deficiency. Because no thyroid hormones inhibit pituitary release of TSH, thyroid is overstimulated and it enlarges but functions below normal. Okay, and here we have individuals that are exhibiting infantile hypothyroidism, Graves' disease, and simple goiter. Okay, let's talk about the parathyroid glands now. They're located on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. Most people have 4 of them. They secrete one hormone, which is parathyroid hormone, or PTH, or we can call it parathormone. PTH regulates calcium and phosphate concentrations in the blood. The actions of parathyroid hormone include increasing blood levels of calcium and decreasing phosphate. It can also act on the bones, the kidneys, and intestines to exert their effects. It acts on bones to stimulate bone resorption. It indirectly stimulates calcium absorption by stimulating a step in vitamin D metabolism. It acts on the kidney to cause final step in the production of active vitamin D, also called calcitriol or dihydroxycholecalciferol. It acts on kidneys to conserve calcium and excretes phosphate in the urine. Okay, so you actually have to look at the back side of the thyroid, kind of from the back of the body around the pharynx, and you'll see those 4 small patches that are the parathyroid glands. Okay, and this shows the feedback with PTH and calcium absorption. And this shows some of the actions of the parathyroid hormone that we were mentioning, and shows you what their targets might be, and shows you what chemicals may be involved. Okay, disorders of the parathyroid gland. In hyperparathyroidism, we have fatigue, muscular weakness, painful joints, altered mental functions, depression, weight loss, and bone weakening. Increased PTH secretion will overstimulate osteoclasts that break down bone. Could be caused by tumor, and the treatment would be to remove the tumor or correct bone deformities. In hypoparathyroidism, we have muscle cramps and seizures as a result. Decreased PTH secretion reduces osteoclast activity and diminishes blood calcium ion concentration. Can be caused by an inadvertent surgical removal or an injury, and treatment would be calcium salt injections or massive doses of vitamin D. Okay, let's look at the adrenal glands. They're also called suprarenal glands. They're closely associated with the kidneys, and they sit like a cap on top of each of the kidneys. Numerous hormones are secreted by the adrenal glands. The adrenal hormones play roles in maintaining blood sodium levels and respond in distress, and include certain sex hormones. Adrenal glands contain two portions, outer cortex and an inner medulla. And different hormones are secreted from the cortex versus the medulla. The adrenal cortex, this is the outer portion of the gland, and it secretes steroid hormones like aldosterone, cortisol, and sex hormones. The adrenal medulla is a central portion of the gland, and it secretes amine hormones. 80% of it is epinephrine, 20% is norepinephrine. Okay, and this shows you a tissue cross-section of the adrenal glands. So here you have the cortex, here you have the medulla. Two closely related amine hormones are secreted by the adrenal medulla, epinephrine and norepinephrine, as we mentioned. Also, they're called adrenaline and noradrenaline. Again, the majority is epinephrine at 80%. Effects of these hormones are similar to those of sympathetic stimulation, so increased heart rate, blood pressure, airflow to the lungs, blood glucose level, and decreased digestive activities. In some cases, the effects of the two hormones are identical. Hormonal effects last 10 times longer than those of neurotransmitters because they're removed from the blood much more slowly than neurotransmitters are removed from synapses. So figure 13.28 and 29 show you the structure and synthetic pathways of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, comparative effects of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, on the heart, epinephrine causes heart rate increases and force of contraction increases. And we see the same thing happening with norepinephrine. With blood vessels, there is a difference. Epinephrine causes vasodilation, especially important in skeletal muscle at the onset of fight or flight. Norepinephrine causes vasoconstriction in the skin and viscera, shifts blood flow to other areas, such as exercise and skeletal muscle. Okay, systemic blood pressure. Epinephrine has some increase due to increased cardiac output. For norepinephrine, there's some increase due to increased cardiac output and vasoconstriction at the offset in some areas, such as exercise and skeletal muscle by local vasodilation due to other factors. Airways. Epinephrine causes dilation and norepinephrine causes some dilation. For reticular formation of the brainstem, epinephrine does cause activation. There's very little effect from norepinephrine. For the liver, epinephrine promotes breakdown of glycogen to glucose, increasing blood sugar levels. Norepinephrine has little effect on blood glucose levels. And for metabolic rate, epinephrine and norepinephrine increase the metabolic rate. Okay, the adrenal cortex has 3 zones, each producing different types of hormones. The zona glomerulosa is the outer zone, which produces aldosterone and other mineralocorticoids. The zona fasciculata is a middle zone, and it produces cortisol and other glucocorticoids. The zona reticularis is the inner zone, and it produces male sex hormones, which are called androgens. Okay, some of the hormones of adrenal cortex, aldosterone, it helps regulate the concentration of extracellular electrolytes by conserving sodium ions and excreting potassium ions. Cortisol, it decreases protein synthesis, increases fatty acid release, and stimulates glucose synthesis from non-carbohydrates. Adrenal androgens, they supplement sex hormones from the gonads, and they may be converted to estrogens. Aldosterone and renin-angiotensin systems. Aldosterone promotes excretion of potassium ions by the kidney. It promotes conservation of sodium by the kidneys, and water is retained along with sodium by osmosis. In the renin-angiotensin system, this is the system that helps maintain normal blood pressure. Angiotensin II, which is the product of this system, increases blood pressure, and it promotes secretion of aldosterone. Okay, here we see the aldosterone and renin-angiotensin systems. As you can see, decreasing blood pressure and or sodium ion concentration will stimulate secretion of the enzyme renin. Angiotensin II stimulates adrenal cortical cells to secrete aldosterone. Aldosterone acts on the kidney to conserve sodium ions and by osmosis water, and then blood pressure and or sodium ion concentration will return towards normal, inhibiting further secretion of renin. Okay, cortisol and aldosterone are steroid hormones with very similar structures. Here we see regulation of the cortisol secretion by negative feedback. Okay, some disorders of the adrenal cortex. In Addison disease, this is due to insufficient hormone secretion from the adrenal cortex. It results in electrolyte and glucose imbalances, dehydration, low blood pressure, fatigue, nausea, increased skin pigmentation, and it can be fatal due to severe electrolyte imbalance. In Cushing's syndrome, this is due to hypersecretion of cortisol because of adrenal tumors or excess secretion by ACTH by anterior pituitary. It results in muscle wasting, loss of bone, elevated blood glucose, sodium retention, water retention by osmosis, increased blood pressure, puffy skin, abnormal deposition of adipose tissue in the face and back. The pancreas. This is an elongated, flattened organ that's posterior to the stomach. The pancreatic duct transports digestive juice to the duodenum and contains two major types of secretory tissue. It's both an endocrine and exocrine gland. The endocrine function is for secreting hormones into the body fluids, and exocrine secretes digestive juices through the pancreatic duct. 3 hormones are secreted from the endocrine cells, specifically the pancreatic islets or the islets of Langerhans. Glucagon is secreted by alpha cells, which increases blood glucose. Insulin secreted by beta cells, which decreases blood glucose. And somatostatin is secreted by delta cells. It inhibits secretion of insulin and glucagon. Here you see the structure of the pancreas, and you see the pancreatic islets here in this tissue slide. Okay, let's look at some of the actions of these hormones. Glucagon, it stimulates the liver to break down glycogen and convert non-carbohydrates into glucose, stimulating the breakdown of fats also. Okay, insulin, it promotes formation of glycogen from glucose. It inhibits conversion of non-carbohydrates into glucose and enhances movement of glucose through adipose and muscle cell membranes. It decreases blood glucose concentration. It promotes transport of amino acids into cells. It enhances synthesis of proteins and fats, and it helps regulate carbohydrates. Okay, so as you can see here, if you have an increase in blood glucose after a meal, the pancreatic islets are going to secrete more insulin. It's going to decrease glucagon, and so cellular uptake of glucose is going to occur in formation of glycogen. After or between meals, as your blood glucose decreases, the pancreatic islets decrease the insulin secretion and they increase glucagon secretion. So glycogen is broken down into glucose and non-carbohydrates are converted to glucose. In diabetes mellitus, we have a metabolic disease that results from lack of insulin or inability of the cells to recognize insulin. Elevated blood glucose can damage the eyes and heart, kidney, and the nerves. It results in disturbances in carbohydrate, protein, and fat metabolism. Insulin normally promotes glucose uptake by adipose and muscle cells. In diabetes mellitus, carbohydrates cannot enter the cells in normal quantities. It results in hyperglycemia or high blood glucose. Cells turn to other sources of energy, which promotes tissue wasting. Weight declines, hunger increases, fatigue increases, and wounds do not heal well. Growth stops in children. Glucose spills into urine, which is what we call glycosuria, and water follows by osmosis, leading to dehydration and thirst. Okay, diabetes mellitus, type 1 and 2. In type 1 diabetes mellitus, this is also called juvenile or insulin dependent. It usually begins before the age of 20. It's an autoimmune disease. The immune system destroys its beta cells of the pancreas and results in a lack of insulin production. 5 to 10% of cases are type 1. In type 2, this is called maturity onset or non-insulin dependent. This is 90 to 95% of the cases. Insulin is produced, but the body cells are unable to recognize it. It's milder than type 1, but complications can include coronary artery disease, nerve, or retinal damage. How do we treat these? For type 1, it requires administration of insulin. Insulin can be obtained from pigs and cattle. Human insulin can be synthesized using recombinant DNA technology now. Insulin is produced by genetically altered bacteria. People receive insulin through injection, an insulin pump, or in an aerosol form. Transdermal delivery systems or the skin patch is being developed. Pancreatic islet transplantation is being used in some countries also. How do we treat type 2? Low carbohydrate, high protein diet, regular exercise. And there are medications that increase glucose production. Gastric bypass surgery is also a possibility. Okay, the pineal, thymus, and other glands. The pineal gland is found in the brain between the cerebral hemispheres. It secretes melatonin, which regulates circadian rhythm. That's the day and night cycles. The thymus gland, this is found in the mediastinum between the lungs. It secretes thymosins, which promote development of T lymphocytes. It has an important role in immunity. Other glands, we have reproductive organs like ovaries, which produce estrogens and progesterone, and the testes that produce testosterone. And the placenta produces estrogens, progesterone, and gonadotropin. Digestive glands also, they produce hormones to regulate digestion. The heart also produces natriuretic peptides that stimulate sodium secretion in the urine. And the kidneys produce erythropoietin, which stimulate red blood cell formation. Okay, stress and its effects. Affects many people, and I expect you've had some effects from it as well. Survival depends on maintaining homeostasis, of course, or just keeping a balance of things. Factors that change the internal or external environment are potentially life-threatening. Certain potentially dangerous factors can trigger a loss of a homeostasis. When sensory receptors detect changes, they send nerve impulses to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus activates sympathetic nervous system and increases secretion of adrenal hormones. Factor capable of initiating this response is a stressor. A stress is the condition produced in response to the stressor. And types of stress include psychological stress, which can cause danger, personal loss, anger, fear, guilt, or physical stress, which can be caused by temperature extremes, infection, injury, or oxygen deficiency. Okay, your response. The hypothalamus controls the response to stress. This response is called the general adaptation syndrome. And there's 2 stages of general stress syndrome. The alarm stage. This is the fight or flight response. It's immediate, does not last long. Sympathetic impulses increase blood glucose and fatty acids, heart and breathing rate, and blood pressure. It dilates air passages, shunts blood to the skeletal muscles, and increases epinephrine secretion. Epinephrine intensifies and prolongs these responses. Then there's the resistance stage. It's slower and long-lasting. The CRH-ACTH cortisol pathway increases the cortisol secretion. Increased cortisol spares glucose for the brain. Cortisol, glucagon, and growth hormone mobilize energy sources for other tissues and organs. And antidiuretic hormone renin will cause water retention. Then there's the exhaustion stage. It begins after months of being in the resistance stage. Wasting is due to depletion of nutrients in the body. There's an electrolyte imbalance, suppression of the immune system, and effects are due to long-term oversecretion of cortisol. It can result in death. And this shows the overall model of general adaptation syndrome. And this gives you the major events in the general stress syndrome that we outlined earlier. Okay, as usual, we talk about lifespan changes at the end of these sections. The endocrine glands do start decreasing in size. Muscular and skeletal strength decreases as growth hormone levels decline. Antidiuretic hormone levels increase due to slower elimination by the liver and kidneys. Calcitonin levels decrease, increasing the risk of osteoporosis. Parathyroid hormone levels change and contribute to the risk of osteoporosis, especially in females. Insulin resistance may develop. Changes in melatonin secretion affect the body clock. And thymosin production declines, which increases the risk of infections. And that is the end of the endocrine system chapter.